Giants weren't erased from history to hide some magical golden age of the old world. They were the actual problem. I mean, if they existed in any real capacity, they weren't peaceful guardians of lost architecture. They were unstable biological siege engines. And their disappearance wasn't some grand occult cover-up. It was a global biosecurity protocol. A desperately needed culling to exterminate a biological anomaly that was completely incompatible with modern military and industrial infrastructure. Just let me get this out while it's fresh in my head, because I've been sitting here in this freezing room going through these photocopied physical anthropology during the 1920s, and the dust is literally drying up my contacts. My eyes burn, but the math in these pages is keeping me awake. I don't believe in internet conspiracy. I really don't. I hate the romanticized, soft-focused myth-making that plagues this entire topic. You see it everywhere online. People posting grainy photos of massive doorways or oversized axes and spinning these beautiful, tragic fairy tales about a utopian giant race that was hidden from us by the elites. It's comforting, I guess. It makes the past look like a fantasy novel. But reality doesn't operate on poetry. Reality operates on physics. It operates on logistics. And when you strip away the mythology and actually apply biology to the concept of human gigantism, the narrative rots from the inside out. Extreme human scale isn't an evolutionary upgrade. It is a catastrophic structural failure. I want you to think about the square cube law. It's basic biomechanics. When an object undergoes a proportional increase in size, its new surface area is proportional to the square of the multiplier, but its new volume is proportional to the cube. If you double a human's height, you don't just double their weight, you increase it by a factor of 8. But the cross-section of their bones, the actual load-bearing surface, only increases by a factor of 4. The math breaks. The human body is incredibly specific. The femur can only handle so much mechanical stress before it microfractures. The human heart, is a pump calibrated for a very specific vertical climb. Pumping thick blood 6 feet up against gravity is one thing. Pumping it 8, 9, 10 feet up? The pressure required tears the valves apart. Modern endocrinology confirms this. Look at the medical reality of pathological gigantism. Look at Robert Wadlow. He was 8 feet 11 inches, the tallest documented human in modern medical history. People look at pictures of him and just see a very tall man in a suit. They don't see what was happening under the fabric. They don't see the heavy iron braces strapped to his legs, cutting into his flesh just to keep his skeleton from collapsing under its own mass. He didn't die in some heroic fashion. He died at 22 from a septic blister on his ankle. His peripheral nervous system was so degraded, his circulation so weak at the extremities, that he couldn't even feel the brace rubbing a hole into his skin until the infection hit his bloodstream. Body was a prison of failing organs. So if we entertain the idea, even just as a thought experiment, that there was a historical population operating at these extreme scales, we are not looking at gods. We are looking at a walking medical emergency, a biological anomaly that requires massive caloric and medical upkeep. And anomalies, especially on a mass scale, create immediate logistical and military nightmares. We have documented proof that governments have tried to weaponize human scale, and we have the records of exactly how badly it failed. Go back to Prussia. Between 1675 and 1740, King Frederick William the Stirs. He didn't build a normal army. He was obsessed with height. He created the Potsdam Giants, the Riesengarde. He literally kidnapped abnormally tall men from all over Europe. He bought them from other monarchs. He forced them into a primitive eugenics program, breeding them with tall women to create a master regiment of living siege tools. This is a matter of historical record. It's in the state archives. No, they were a disaster. The medical reports from the era are brutal. These men suffered from severe osteoporosis induced by their own mass. They had premature heart failure. They were so physically compromised that they were completely useless in actual combat. If you ordered them to march at a standard infantry pace, their joints would snap. They were parade ground freaks who broke down if you actually tried to use them. Frederick William tried to engineer biological warfare using human scale, and he hit the hard ceiling of mammalian biology. Now take a breath. I need some water. Hold on. Just think about the logistics for a second. Step out of the 18th century and look at the Industrial Revolution. Look at the supply chains that built the modern world. Everything we consider modern civilization is built on the concept of standardization. If you have a workforce or an infantry unit, you need predictable consumption rates. A standard human male doing heavy labor burns maybe 3,500 calories a day. A 9-foot asset with the muscle mass required to move that frame is going to burn 10 to 12,000 calories just to maintain resting homeostasis. One of these biological anomalies eats the rations of 4 normal men. How do you feed a battalion of them during a siege? Look at the dimensions of a standard rail car, the gauge of the tracks, the height of the tunnels cut through the mountains. Everything was shrinking and standardizing. This is the core issue that nobody in the alternative history space wants to talk about, the crisis of standardization. By the time Eli Whitney is demonstrating interchangeable parts for muskets, the writing is on the wall. The world was being optimized for a very specific operational window. Take early 20th century warfare, the trench logistics of World War I. A standard trench is dug to a very specific depth to protect a 5'8" male from shrapnel while allowing him to fire over the parapet. The uniforms are mass-produced. The early MREs, the rations, the boots, everything is identical. If you introduce even a 5% biological variance into that supply chain, the entire system grinds to a halt. You can't issue standard gear to an asset that doesn't fit in the transport truck. You can't put a 9-foot man in a standard trench. He's just a target. The military-industrial complex cannot tolerate biological outliers. It's physically impossible to scale the infrastructure to accommodate 2 completely different species of human. You have to choose one. So what do you do if you inherit a world that still has these things walking around? These biological siege engines left over from whatever heavy extraction operations were happening in the centuries prior. The people who talk about Tartaria love to point at the massive masonry, the oversized doors, the impossible logistics of the old world architecture. And maybe they're right about the infrastructure being built for something else. Maybe these anomalies were used for heavy extraction, hauling stone, moving raw materials before steam power was perfected. Places where sheer mass and leverage mattered more than the lifespan of the worker. But the moment the steam engine is viable, the moment dynamite is stabilized, what happens to the biological forklift? It becomes obsolete. But unlike a machine, you can't park a biological asset in a shed and turn off the engine. It keeps eating. It keeps requiring space. It keeps being a logistical liability. And this is where we have to talk about the institutions. Because this is the part that always gets mangled. Everyone points the finger at the Smithsonian Institution. The late 19th and early 20th century. People say the Smithsonian sent agents out to buy up giant bones and dump them in the ocean to hide the truth of our glorious past. That's such a comic book way of looking at how power actually functions. Power doesn't hide magic. Power sanitizes data. Look at Aleš Hrdlička. He was the curator of physical anthropology at the Smithsonian. The man was absolutely obsessed with establishing a clean, standard metric for the human race. He was building the database for modern physical anthropology. When you are building a database, anomalies are not exciting. Anomalies are contamination. If farmers in Ohio are digging up femurs that throw your entire statistical model into chaos, you don't keep them. You discard them. It wasn't an occult conspiracy. It was institutional triage. They were cleaning up the fossil record the same way you run a script to delete corrupted files on a hard drive. Hrdlička and his peers didn't view these oversized remains as evidence of a lost golden age. They viewed them as pathological garbage that ruined their neat, standardized graphs of human progress. They marginalized the findings, classified them as errors in measurement, and buried the physical evidence in the deep storage of bureaucratic apathy. It was a statistical cleansing. But the bones are just the aftermath. What happened to the living populations? If they were here, working the heavy extraction zones, hauling the stones, doing the brutal siege-scale labor of the old world, how do they vanish so cleanly? This is the thought that kept me awake last night staring at Ling. The silence of the city outside just felt her, is biosecurity. When an agricultural asset becomes diseased or economically unviable, you don't build a retirement home for it. You initiate a cull. The transition from the 19th to the 20th century was brutal. It was the era of maximum industrialization, the era of eugenics, the era where the state decided it had the right to mandate the biological purity of its citizens. If you have a remnant population of grossly oversized, calorically expensive, biologically unstable humans, you don't integrate them. You can't. They don't fit in the factories. They don't fit in the tenements. They break the sidewalks. They consume too much. And I don't mean that in a gentle way. I mean you stop feeding them. You push them into conflicts where their scale makes them easy artillery targets. You let the natural cardiovascular failure of their own genetics do the heavy lifting, and you simply stop allowing them. The world was being paved over with concrete and steel, calibrated to the exact millimeter for a standardized worker. There was no room left for giants. They were an engineering failure, a relic of a time when we tried to stretch flesh and bone to do the work of hydraulic presses. And when the hydraulic press was finally invented, we looked at the broken and wheezing, massive bodies of the things we had bred or utilized for the same purpose, and we felt nothing but disgust. They were a liability, a threat to the clean mathematical perfection of the new industrial age, so we erased them. Not because they held the secrets of the universe, not because they were angels or Nephilim or keepers of some sacred Tartarian free emerald. We erased them because they were our mistake. We exterminated them as a measure of global biosecurity, the same way you eradicate a strain of livestock disease, the same way you pave over an old dog. The silence in the historical record isn't the silence of a terrified elite hiding a magical truth. It is the cold, embarrassed silence of a modernizing world sweeping its most grotesque biological experiments under the rug. We standardized the human race. We trimmed the edges off our own biological variants until only the most efficient, easily replaceable, low-calorie worker model remained. That's what survived. That's what we are. The descendants of the optimized, scalable infantry. The giants didn't fall from grace. They just failed the cost-benefit analysis of the Industrial Revolution. And honestly, knowing how humanity operates, knowing the absolute ruthless math of military logistics, I don't need a conspiracy theory to explain why the bones went missing. I just need to look at how we treat anything that doesn't fit on the assembly line. We grind it down, we throw it away, and then we agree, very quietly, to never talk about it again. Let me just pause this. I need to look at the WWI procurement ledgers again. I think I found a correlation in the uniform fabric requisition. Hold on.